Welcome to Muslim Apologetics Australia. I'm going to go through Apostate Prophet's video claiming that Muslims caught distorting video footage which debunks Islam, apparently. And let's listen to it and then we'll do a counter rebuttal.
Hello everyone and welcome. This is the Apostate Prophet. I know many of you who listen to me think that Muslim apologists often lie to save their religion. Today, however, I want to present to you clear proof of edited footage by Muslim apologists from my interview with Bart Ehrman, which they edited, corrupted, in order to make it look like Bart Ehrman agreed with their views. The irony here is that Muslims accuse Christians and Jews of corrupting their scripture and corrupting the past in order to falsify their own beliefs. But here we have Muslim apologists openly corrupting, editing footage for their own narratives. And this footage was shared by so many people. Let's get right into it.
First of all, this is really interesting because no Muslim believes that Bart Ehrman agrees with every single Muslim narrative. There are certain objections that Bart Ehrman has with Islam, but I think it's a bit dishonest when Apostate Prophet says they're manipulating the video to show that Bart Ehrman agrees with Islam. There's a lot of things that Bart Ehrman does agree with Islam. I've actually written an article and you can read it for yourself, go through all the rebuttals and the information, and I'll put a hyperlink below this video and you can actually see it for yourself. But anyway, let's run through the video and let's see what he thinks has been manipulated by Muslim apologists.
The immediate followers of Jesus, that the early Christians were basically Muslims, meaning they didn't hold any of these heretical Christian ideas, and they were completely in alignment with the Islamic religion and the Islamic way of thinking, of simply regarding him as a prophet and worshiping Allah or God alone, and so on. What could you say about that?
So I would say that there are some elements of truth in that, historically, and some things I think I would consider to be problems. But on the basic level, the idea that the earliest followers of Jesus thought that he was a human, and that he worshipped only one God, and they also worshipped only one God. I would say that that's true. That is true.
What about...
Okay, so he said it was true. The early followers of Jesus Christ did not think of him to be God. So that agrees with the Muslim position. Muslims believe that the true disciples of Jesus, the early disciples of Jesus, didn't believe that Jesus was God. Jesus himself didn't believe he was God. The historical Jews, and Bart Ehrman actually agrees with that too. So let's continue.
What about the idea of the Son of God? So according to this footage, Bart Ehrman basically says, yeah, well, that's true. You know, early Christians were basically Muslims. And then the footage moves on to the next question and answer. Now let's look at the actual footage.
So I would say that there are some elements of truth in that, historically.
So he said there's elements of truth historically. Okay, so what's the objection?
And some things I think I would consider to be problems. But on the basic level, the idea that the earliest followers of Jesus thought that he was a human, and that he worshipped only one God, and they also worshipped only one God. I would say that that's true. That is true. I think that these earliest Christians, though, right after his death, believed that God had raised him from the dead and taken him up to heaven. And in the ancient views, whether it's Greek or Roman or Christian or Jewish, these ancient views, if somebody's taken up to heaven, they're living with God. They are made immortal, so they don't die again, unlike everyone else who dies again. An immortal is just another name for gods in ancient Greek. Jesus was made immortal, and I think that according to his followers, and so they started worshiping him. They didn't worship him as the one only God, but he was a being who deserved worship, and so they considered him to be the Lord whom they worshipped. And I think that happened early on. But they understood that during his life he was a human. Mm-hmm. they would not have agreed with most of the tenets of Islam that differ from Christianity, in my judgment. That I don't think is right historically.
But so the deification or turning Jesus into a god would then have begun due to the crucifixion and due to stories about the crucifixion within a lifetime of the crucifixion, basically.
Yeah, well, yeah, I would say at the resurrection. I would say that what happened is, he got crucified. Lots of people were getting crucified, but the difference in his case is his followers came to think that he was raised from the dead. And it's not that he had a near-death experience. It's not that he died and came back for a while and then died again. In their view, he was raised. God raised him from the dead and took him up to heaven, and that was the deification. Mm-hmm. Later Christians then started saying, well, he didn't get deified at the resurrection. He'd been God from the time he was born, and so you start getting these ideas of the virgin birth. And people say, well, actually, he was God before he was born, so the developing understanding of Christ happens over time. But the earliest Christians, I think, did not think he pre-existed, did not think he was born of a virgin. They thought he was a great teacher who was more righteous than anyone else that God had made into a divine being.
That is just horrible. It's damning. I asked Bart Ehrman this question very deliberately because I know what he thinks. I know about his research. So in the actual footage, in the actual uncut, unedited interview, he clearly responds to me saying that the early Christians, the immediate followers of Jesus, began worshiping him.
They started worshiping him.
He says that while he was alive, they did not literally worship him.
They thought he was a great teacher who was more righteous than anyone else that God had made into a divine being.
And whether you agree with that or not is besides the point. He says after Jesus dies and is resurrected, they start deifying him and turning him into a god. And then, over the centuries, ideas develop on how he is divine, why he is divine, when he became divine, what his role in the divinity is, and so on. Which clearly means that the early Christians, his immediate followers, were not what Muslims would call Muslims. Cutting this part out and only presenting the early part, in which he doesn't even fully answer my question, is nothing but sheer dishonesty, corruption. It's a lie. This Muslim apologist here clearly lies about me and about Bart Ehrman in order to validate their own Islamic positions, in order to make it look like Bart Ehrman agrees with the Islamic point of view, when he clearly doesn't. If it is not a lie, then what is it? I now want to ask these people and these Muslim apologists, why do you lie and why do you corrupt?
No one is lying and no one is corrupting. In fact, that still affirms the Muslim position. Bart Ehrman clearly said that when the disciples were alive with Jesus, they didn't come to worship him. They didn't come to believe he was God. Even though the same Christians at the time, the disciples of Jesus, they saw the miracles, they saw the signs, they saw him turn water into wine, they saw him heal the sick. They never believed that he was God, and yet Christian apologists use these very same arguments to prove that Jesus was God. And notice, he says, for example, that they only started worshipping him after they seen the resurrection, or seen him rise from the dead and things like that. Again, that doesn't disprove Islam. That doesn't show that Islam was wrong, because if you go to the earliest methodology of these disciples, while Jesus was alive, they didn't worship him. So if you want to disprove Islam, not only do you have to prove that the disciples were worshipping him after Jesus ascended to heaven, but they also were worshipping him during his lifetime. And notice, there's a clear distinction. They weren't doing that. And what is even more peculiar is that, as Bart Ehrman says, most of the teachings of divinity come from the Gospel of John as opposed to the Gospel of Mark. It's a snowball effect. And we know that Bart Ehrman has said that Jesus, since most of these stories existed in the Gospel of John, Bart Ehrman has also said clearly that the Gospels are unreliable. So then how does Apostate Prophet come to the conclusion that, oh look, it disproves Islam? this narrative of Jesus being divine, when Bart Ehrman says himself that the Gospels are unreliable. So let me ask you the question, Apostate Prophet. Why are you manipulating Bart Ehrman in order to have a point of finger against Islam when you yourself is manipulating Bart Ehrman's position in order to discredit Islam, when that very man himself says that the Gospels themselves are unreliable? And most of these teachings that claim Jesus' divinity, before me, or I am, and all these verses that exist in the Gospel of John, they exist in a book that is unreliable, according to Bart Ehrman. So if you want to use everything of Bart Ehrman, why are you manipulating and leaving this particular point out where Bart Ehrman clearly says that the Gospels are unreliable?
Divinity is, and so on, which clearly means that the early Christians, his immediate followers, were not what Muslims would call Muslims. Cutting this part.
Now, this is interesting too, because when we actually look at the disciples of Jesus, you look at the stories, and Jesus actually says to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan." So he actually calls one of Jesus' disciples Satan. Of course, Jesus had 11 or 12 disciples. One betrayed him. And of course, there would be some amongst them who were apostated, or who weren't being faithfully true. I don't think all Muslims would say that every single disciple of Jesus was faithful. I don't believe there is any Islamic sources out there that say every single one of them were faithful. Even during the Prophet Muhammad's time, there would have been some close, I wouldn't really say companions or Sahabi, but those who accepted Islam, some of them betrayed the message and left. And so, yeah, I mean, a similitude could happen with Jesus and his disciples. But when we actually look at the teachings, we see, as Bart Ehrman declares, that the earliest disciples, the ones that lived with Jesus, the ones that met Jesus, they were, we could say, they didn't worship Jesus as God. Whether they worshipped Jesus after his ascension, and some of them got misguided, that's a possibility, and I don't think any Muslim denies that. And if they do, it doesn't really disprove Islam, because, again, people can deviate, just as Muslims today could deviate, just as Apostate Prophet could deviate from Islam. But again, it doesn't disprove Islam, because what you're basically saying is, it disproves Islam because, Muslim apologists say that Jesus isn't God, and therefore, Christianity preaches Jesus God, and even the disciples believe that Jesus is God. No, that doesn't make Christianity true. It doesn't disprove Islam. All it shows is that some disciples may have deviated from the right path. But the true message is that when they were living with Jesus, none of them worshipped him. So that's more testament. I mean, if they were worshipping him while he was alive, then that would be a different story. But according to Bart Ehrman, that never happened during Jesus' lifetime, which credits Islam. Now, Apostate Prophet goes on and talks about, Muslim apologists are leaving things out. Let's have a listen.
Cutting this part out and only presenting the early part, in which he doesn't even fully answer my question, is nothing but sheer dishonesty, corruption. It's a lie. This Muslim apologist here clearly lies about me and about Bart Ehrman in order to validate their own Islamic positions, in order to make it look like Bart Ehrman agrees with the Islamic point of view, when he clearly doesn't. If it is not a lie, then what is it? I now want to ask these people and these Muslim apologists, why do you lie and why do you corrupt footage? Does it disturb you that Bart Ehrman, who doesn't agree with Christianity at all, comes to a scholarly conclusion that entirely disagrees with the core ideas of Islam? Do you guys...
Okay, so this guy is a liar. He says Bart Ehrman clearly He says, Bart Ehrman entirely disagrees with the core teachings of Islam.
Or ideas of Islam. Do you...
The ideas of Islam. Well, does it really? I mean, look who is the blatant liar here. Because it says Jesus' early disciples didn't think of Jesus to be God. This is during his life, right? So that agrees with Islam, right? Because Jesus, I mean, people can believe things after Jesus goes, but there's more affirmation what they really believe during his life. Because if Jesus is there, Jesus could question them upon their beliefs, right? There's an authority. But if someone goes, then anyone can just talk anything about him. So the fact that Jesus' disciples didn't believe he was God while Jesus was here is a stronger affirmation, in my opinion. And this is what he didn't touch upon. He says, Bart Ehrman's against the core teachings of Islam and things like that. But, why did he leave out? Why did the Apostate Prophet leave out the point about Jesus was not God's son in any special sense, and that Israel was also God's son? This is what the historical Jesus was believed to be, according to Bart Ehrman, which is clearly what Islam teaches. Islam teaches that Jesus wasn't the Son of God, the way the Christians proclaim it to be. Again, is this against the core teachings of Islam? Why is Apostate Prophet manipulating and lying now, saying that Bart Ehrman is in disagreement with Islam? What about the Bible errors in its authenticity, which is an important issue? The Quran, for example, has been copied faithfully. Why did he leave that part out, Apostate Prophet? Because the Quran, according to Bart Ehrman, has been copied a lot more faithfully over the years, whereas the Bible has errors in it. And that, again, approves Islam, because Islamic teachings teach that although there was truth in the Bible, it has been corrupted over time. Again, why hasn't Apostate Prophet mentioned that Bart Ehrman has an agreement with Islam? Bart Ehrman also admits that the 6 out of the 13 books claimed to be written by Apostle Paul are doubted to be written by Apostle Paul by scholars of the New Testament. So again, Christians like to say, Paul authored his writings and he wrote letters and he inspired and helped the gospel. He was inspired by Jesus and he saw a vision of light in the sky, and whatever Paul says is true. But again, the Islamic teachings teach that this is false. Paul is false in the sense that he is not inspired, and there isn't evidence that his books are inspired. And yet Bart Ehrman agrees that 13 of his books are doubted that they're actually written by Paul. Also, does Bart Ehrman actually believe that Jesus rose from the dead in that episode? And no, he doesn't actually believe that. Does the Islamic teaching say that Jesus rose from the dead at that instant? No, the Islamic teaching doesn't say that he rose from the dead when that crucifixion and things like that took place. But again, why does Apostate Prophet leave that part out?
Considering him the Son of God, in a sense, considering him divine in...
He's a liar. He says Christianity, Bart Ehrman's position is that the disciples believed that Jesus was the Son of God in a sense. No, I don't think... I don't think you can use that point against Islam, because Bart Ehrman himself clearly said that Jesus never believed that he was the Son of God in that sense, and the Bible doesn't really preach that Jesus was the Son of God in any special sense, because Israel was God's first son. So for you to claim that the disciples themselves believe that, I don't think Bart Ehrman is in agreement to that, because Bart Ehrman clearly says that the Son of God here doesn't mean in any special sense, and that Israel was also God's first son.
In a sense, was always part of Christianity. Where exactly then do you fit in the entire narrative that Christians were at some point righteous?
Well, you just admitted it yourself, and so did Bart Ehrman, that you said where, at what time or what point did they believe that they were righteous and so forth. Well, it was during Jesus' lifetime, right? Duh!
The Islamic narrative is nonsense. It engages in baseless revisionism of Christian history. You try to say that those Christians who worship Jesus are disbelievers who will go to hell forever, and that actual Christians, real Christians...
No, we don't. We don't actually say that. Again, not all of them worshipped Jesus, and there's no evidence that every single one of them worshipped Jesus. There may have been, Christians like to use the Thomas argument, Thomas worshipped Jesus, but does it say the rest of them did? Who knows? So again, there's also other Muslim apologetics who've put clear rebuttals against this, where Thomas said, "My Lord and my God," and worshipped him and things like this. But again, this could be clearly debunked and refuted, because even Satan is called God in the Bible. Even the Jews were called gods in the Bible. Jesus said, "You are gods." This is in between John 30 to John 35. Isn't it written in your law, in your book, that you are gods? So this was a term expressed to show that they are godly people, not God in any special sense. But again,
conclusion that entirely disagrees with the core ideas of Islam. Do you guys see and agree that the early Christians worshipped Jesus? And
no, they didn't, because in Jesus' time they didn't worship him. Now, whether they worshipped him after Jesus, we don't really care about that. That doesn't affect anything, because there is more authority of worshipping him while Jesus is there as an authority. That would be more evidence, more stronger points to use against Islam. But again, after Jesus goes and some worship him, well, that doesn't disprove anything. That really doesn't disprove anything. It just shows that some of them have deviated. But the early disciples, during the lifetime of Jesus, they did not worship him. What else more evidence do you want? That in itself is more authority than when Jesus goes away and certain disciples decide to worship him. And again, that's coming from a book that Bart Ehrman says is unreliable.
And that worshipping Jesus and considering him the Son of God, in a sense, considering him divine, in a sense, was always part of Christianity. Where exactly...
He says always part of Christianity, yet he himself said that when Jesus was alive, they didn't worship him. And yet he lies, saying it was always part of Christianity.
Exactly then do you fit in the entire narrative that Christians were at some point righteous? The Islamic...
You answered it. When Jesus was alive, they were righteous.
Narrative is nonsense. It engages in baseless revisionism of Christian history. You try to say that those Christians who worship Jesus are disbelievers who will go to hell forever, and that actual Christians, real Christians or early Christians, were loyal followers of the one true God, Allah. But that is simply not historically true. Please stop lying to the public. Stop lying to yourselves.
No. You stop lying to yourself, because no Muslim claims that every single disciple of Jesus was on the right path. No one claims that. That's what you're claiming and assuming you're claiming. And again, that the followers of Jesus, possibly, you know what, for argument's sake, they could all have been on the right path. Perhaps they were. Suppose they were. Let's say the Islamic position is right and they all were. You can't even prove it 100%, because if you're going to use Bart Ehrman, It is Bart Ehrman himself who says that the Bible itself is unreliable.
It's horrible. Feel free to spread this, everyone. Thank you for watching, and stay away from Islam.
Yes,
Now it's time for sport.
So yes, I'll feel free to spread your stupidity and subscribe. God bless.